What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Soul Surplus Podcast. It is episode 3. I am your host, Wes Pendleton, along with my co-host, John Smythe. John, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. Had a good weekend. Spent some time with some people that I love. So good time.
Dope. I spent my weekend laid up watching NBA playoffs. First weekend, Sixers came out and straight walloped the Heat, and I hope that they continue to do that for the next 3 to 4 games, man.
I wish I knew enough about basketball to say something, but I don't. So sounds good to me.
Right, exactly. Yeah, man. Well, thanks for everybody for tuning in. Our episode this week is going to center around adding elements to your production to make it better. And today, if you actually head over to soulsurplus.com to our news section, John Smythe just wrote a really great article centering around 4 ways to incorporate guitar into your next production. And when we were talking about this last week, we figured that this would be an excellent topic to talk about on the podcast. Make it a little bit more broad, just because everybody doesn't play guitar. But obviously, as a musician and as a guitarist, obviously we want you to add that in. But we wanted to just bring this topic to the podcast and talk about some of the tips and techniques that you and I have picked up over the years to kind of fill out your production and make it that much better, man.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited.
So I guess we can kind of like go back to the beginning. I guess when I first started really recognizing that there was a difference in my production and what I was hearing on the radio. Obviously, there's just, the guys that are on the radio, they have much better sounds, much better engineers, much better mastering processes. And so, me being in the basement in my parents' house, obviously I wasn't going to be able to get a sound that was comparable to what those guys were doing. But at the same time, there were still some things from like the mid 90s, late 90s that I didn't really feel like had a whole lot of shine on it. It was just, I just loved the vibe and the feel of the track. And so I'm sitting there doing boom bap and I'm trying to figure out, why I wasn't getting those same types of elements into my production. So first and foremost, the first thing obviously is going to be your hardware, and an MPC, or an ASR 10 is just going to have a little bit more punch than, like a software instrument or VST, obviously. But then there were these other things that I could hear from having blessed to have an acute ear. I noticed that there was almost like this background movement going on in the production that I just could not achieve digitally. And it wasn't until later that I realized that a lot of what it was noise, effects, EQ, random sounds, reverb, all these different things that they added to the production to kind of fill out what would be, a basic track to just give it that much more feel. So I know for myself, one of the things that I love especially in boom bap. So these guys are sampling, old breaks. And so they're basically taking a break and they're stripping it down to the core elements, which is like a kick, a hi-hat, and a snare. And because they're breaking down these breaks, there's like these mild tails. And then there's also just this natural background noise that came from the original recording from either tape hiss, or if somebody is pulling it from vinyl, there's that vinyl hiss as well that comes along with it. And so what I did not realize was, a lot of that was a lot of the reason that there was a lot of background sound, on top of the fact of how they recorded it and then printed it to tape. That also added an element. But there's just so many things that you can add. And so before I really get down into like the weird stuff, I definitely wanted you to start off from a musician standpoint. As a guitarist, obviously your methods are going to be a little bit different than the average music producer. So you recently wrote that article, like we said, on adding guitar to your production. Could you expound on some of those techniques that you highlighted, and maybe even go just a little bit more in depth than you did in the article, man?
Yeah. So in the article, I mentioned 4 methods, and these are methods that I've been using for a few years now. And I'm a session guitarist, so I'm having to play a lot of different genres. And in hip hop, there's not always, guitar's not always the first thing. It's always drums and then sample and then bass and then synth. But the guitar doesn't get a lot of love. Right. So I've actually gotten a lot of placements just from knowing how and what to add. And it's made me some money too.
Nice.
Yeah, so I wanted to help you guys out with this. So that's why I wrote the article. So I'll go through some of the methods as Wes said. So the first one is a guitar solo, which is very obvious. It's one of the first things people think of when they think of playing guitar. You probably picture Slash with long hair and he's got the shades on, he's got the vest on. But, you don't have to be a rock star, but you have to know what to play.
Right.
So when I do guitar solos, I usually like to have on a pedal called the Power Stack by Boss.
Right.
And I think Boss, sometimes people give it a bad rap because of pedals like the Metal Zone, which are very genre niche. But the Power Stack, to me, you can accomplish a lot of different things with it. So it's emulating a Marshall half stack, which is one of my favorite sounds in rock music.
Got you.
But
so is the Power Stack basically a lower budget version of the Marshall pedal?
Well, the half stack is actually a guitar amp.
Amp. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So it is I would consider it, entry level price for a pedal, but it is a cheaper option to getting that sound. Now, of course, to me, I'm so much of a purist. There's not going to be anything like having a real all tube Marshall half stack, something vintage from the 70s.
Right.
But you can trick some people.
Yeah.
I've gotten a lot of compliments, and I'm sure if people were to look at the pedal board that I use, at some of the pedals, the guitar snobs would probably not think that I'm using what I'm using.
Right. It's been interesting too, just hearing, every now and again I'll get messages on our social media channels, DMs, and guys are asking, what plugins did you guys use for the Roadie pack, or what plugins did you guys use for the Daydream pack? And I'm quick to say, first of all, that's none of your business, and then secondly, that's all analog. That's all straight from the guitar into an amp and out to a mic. And then guys, it's amazing just seeing, oh man, I wish there was some type of emulation that we could use on our production to kind of get that same feel. And when I get those types of questions, they just make me proud of our team, just because I feel like that we're achieving something that a lot of the other companies and brands aren't able to achieve regularly. And this is not something that we're reserving for special occasions. Like, this is just on pretty much everything that you have a hand in, which is awesome. So listen, I'm not a guitarist. I don't know anything about, stacks and pedals and and amps and all that stuff. So whatever you're doing, man, keep on doing it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's really there's really nothing that can emulate exactly the feeling. People have come close with the sound, but there's just something about the feeling,
right,
of playing an amp that is cranked all the way up and you get some overdrive, or there's nothing like the feeling of a real analog delay.
Right.
It's just something that can't really can't be quantified. But yeah, so that first tip was a guitar solo. Speaking of delay, I do like to use some delay when I do a guitar solo. I sort of treat a guitar solo like I'm mixing a vocal, because it kind of stands in the same spot. So you want to take those boomy lows out sometimes you'll get from the guitar amp, and you want to make sure it's sitting, the mid-range is sitting really nice in there.
Okay.
So yeah, guitar solo is a good way and the most exciting way to add guitar. It doesn't always fit in every situation, so I would say add the guitar solo when you hear maybe it's a gospel sample or something with a screaming organ, or maybe there's other guitars there.
Even though you're speaking to musicians first, this is for you as a producer as well. And this is why we offer guitar sample packs or composition packs that, primarily revolve around the guitar, because, with the stems, you can basically achieve the same thing via the playing that you've played for that particular sample pack.
Right. Also, for maybe if you're an engineer and you have a guitarist in the studio and maybe you don't know everything about what a guitar does or the tones, you can, use these tips and tell your guitarist, hey, can you get something that sounds like a half stack? And the guitarist hopefully will know what you're talking about. Hopefully. So the second tip is an upstroke on this snare drum. So for those of you who have heard the roadie pack, I use this technique on the composition called Exodus. Can you play that for them, Wes?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so if you notice on beats 2 and 4, you'll hear this guitar. It's kind of doing this bink thing.
Right.
And so that's a technique you commonly hear in soul music in the 60s. You'll hear that spring reverb sound, which is something that you'll find in most Fender amps. It's just a very vintage sounding reverb that will instantly take you back to that era. And so, like I mentioned, I like to use a Fender amplifier. The one I'm using here in the studio is the Fender Hot Rod Deluxe. And it is actually not a vintage amplifier, but it still has that Fender branding and that Fender sound. So you can get really close to that sound. In fact, I think it's almost the same thing, at least in my eyes,
Gotcha.
But this is a technique that I've actually used to get a lot of placements. I've gotten placements. Actually, the song "Love" by Andy Mineo. I'll never forget that session. That was a very long, into the night session.
Right.
But I do other things on that song, but that was kind of the thing that gave it the vibe, gave it a sample kind of vibe.
Right.
So that's really kind of where you can place this technique, is if you have something that is a sample maybe from the 60s, late 60s, 70s, and you sort of need a texture that's just going to fit in, but kind of be out of the way.
Right.
And so yeah, that's something that I like to do. Also, speaking of it being out of the way, you don't want to hold the chord. You want to upstroke, right? And then mute it.
Right.
So it stays out of the way.
That's one thing too. One thing that I definitely wanted to highlight as well. One of the things that I love about especially when we work with your guitar playing, that's incorporated into the packs. When I listen to other guitar packs, they tend to get the strum or the chord, and right after it's done, they'll cut it, and so they'll make it like super clean.
Right.
But I love the fact that we just leave all of the noise, all of the kickback from the amp, going directly into the mic, right into the session. And so just to hold that thought right there, I want to talk about how you can actually add that later, if you're not a guitar player, into more of like a boom bap type of, or even trap. Like it works in trap too, modern type of drum element. But I digress. I keep going. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, but you know what? Also, to add to that, not a dig against guitar players, but if you're making your guitar samples, or you're making your even just guitar tracks, which you're putting into the track, if you're making it too clean, I really think that just comes from not having a knowledge or not having a relationship with all different kinds of genres. Because when you hear my packs, I haven't made a rock and roll or a heavier kind of pack yet.
Yeah, not yet, but it's coming.
Yet. It's coming soon. But that noise, to me, that's rock and roll.
Right.
You have that amp up, you hear that hiss.
Yep.
man, that's rock and roll. Or that spring reverb, to me, that's Motown. That's the 60s.
Yep.
And so I'm drawing from all these feelings and all these tones when I do these packs. And it's about guitar playing, but it's always to me about a feeling.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And really, that's what all these techniques are. They're to bring a feeling. I could tell you, make sure you play a minor 6 chord, if you know what I mean. But these are techniques and textures that give you a feeling.
There's a quote from Miles Davis when he's like, he's like, the note is like 20% of, what he's doing. He's like, the other 80% is the MF that's playing the instrument. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's all about it's all about the person, who's actually doing the playing. So that's dope, man. So what about, where are we at? Number 3 now already?
So yeah, we're on tip number 3, and tip number 3 is following the bass line. So again, I want to make a reference to a track from the Roadie pack. Could you play Chronicles for us, Wes?
Yeah, let me cue that up real quick.
Cool. So if you guys heard that, you probably noticed that there's a guitar on top of the bass playing the same exact notes, but it's adding a grit and a texture, and it's staying out of the way, which is kind of one of the more important things, depending on the genre that you're in. Mm-hmm. Is being heard, but staying out of the way of maybe the other guitars or other synths or vocals or something.
Right.
So for this technique, I kind of follow the same tone as the upstroke technique. I want to have the spring reverb on my amp on, but maybe a little less, because I don't want to cloud up that 200 hertz, 300 hertz area where the bass is.
Right.
And I also want to high pass filter the guitar, while I'm mixing it. Or if you have a high pass filter on your preamp, that's even better. But you don't want to have that build up again in the same area, that 200, 300 hertz, because that's the stuff that just gets very muddy.
It's interesting, like in my mixing techniques, a lot of people are like, how do you get it to not sound, how do you get the bass not to rumble so much? And I'm just like, just cutting a frequency. It's
right.
Anything below like 150, a lot of times it's just going to be mud anyway.
Right.
Even sometimes I might even let it get down to 100. Definitely below 100, it's just going to be mud.
Right. Yeah. I do like the high pass filter. Then I also do some narrow cuts a little bit above that 150 area, depending on the instrument, of course. Sometimes I will solo out that frequency just to hear what it sounds like. And then sometimes I'll listen to it without it. And a lot of times the instrument just sounds the same. Right. Or the vocal just sounds the same. It just fits better. So yeah, that's a really good technique. It really works again with 60s kind of things. Or if you have a bass line that is sort of the hook of the song, mm-hmm. and you want to give it a little more definition, make it stand out more, this technique is absolutely perfect for that.
Gotcha. So step number 4?
Step 4 is ambient swells.
This is one of my favorite things that you do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of something that I've been a little known for in the hip hop arena. That's a funny way to say it, right? The hip hop arena. I sound like I've never listened to hip hop in my life.
Are you talking about the Wells Fargo Centers?
Right. I'm talking about the Gangstar album, Step Into the Arena.
Right.
I had to make a 90s reference so they know it's real.
Facts.
The album is amazing. Anyway, so yeah, that's something that I've been known to add. Maybe not even just in hip hop, but all over. So I actually want to make reference to a track called Creepy Door from the Daydream pack. Can you play that?
Yeah, let me grab that.
It does sound really creepy and really ghostly. That's kind of maybe what you want to go for in your tracks. And the reverb and the delays are really what gives it that feeling. That's a very, very ambient, washy kind of tone that I love to use. And I would like to talk about the pedals because there's a few different approaches you can take. For me, doing the Daydream pack, my reverb pedal was actually on another rig at the time, so I didn't have access to it. But I did have access to the reverb on my guitar amp, which is that same spring reverb.
Right.
And I also had 3 delay pedals. So a lot of times you can think about a reverb as a bunch of delays happening right after each other. It actually creates a really smooth tail. Mm-hmm. If you place the timing of the delays right. Okay. So I had a Bayang Time Machine, which is, I guess it's not really rare, but it's a really inexpensive pedal actually that I don't see a lot. I had a T-Rex Tap Tone, which is a delay where you can tap in the speed of the delay. And I also had the Nova Repeater, which is probably my favorite pedal that I've owned ever. I've done so much with this. And there's a lot you can do with that pedal. Maybe I'll talk about it on another podcast. But so I have these 3 delays. The tap tone is always modulated, meaning that the delay signal, there's sort of a portamento kind of thing happening.
Okay.
And when you play one chord, right, there's a dry signal, then the delay signal is modulating. Mm-hmm. So it creates almost a chorus kind of thing.
Gotcha.
And so I set these delays pretty quick, and then I have the spring reverb on the amp. And so I take my volume, I have it at 0 on my guitar, and I play a chord, and then I turn up the volume gradually. And that's how you get that swell.
Okay.
And I guess sort of to transition, I remember you were talking about background noise.
Right.
And that is really the secret to what makes the Daydream pack sound like what it sounds like. Is not the guitars. It's not really even the amp or the pedals. It's the way I recorded it. So I had a condenser mic, a tube condenser mic, which is a Charter Oak SA538.
Okay.
And instead of close miking the amp, I had it 5 or 6 feet away. Mm-hmm. And the room was treated, so there's not going to be a lot of bouncing. Right. So you still get clarity, but the distance and the background noise that you achieve with having a condenser mic, I think I had it in either figure 8 or Omni. So you're getting sound from everywhere. Because again, the guitar amp is pretty loud, so it's you're going to hear it all over the room.
Right.
So I had it a few feet away, and it picks up everything. So you'll get a bunch of sounds in the room, maybe stuff vibrating. It just creates a really nice landscape. And so in that pack, you'll hear a lot of ambient noise, aside from the ambience of the actual pedals and everything. But that actually, if I could use a room mic all of the time, I probably would.
Got you.
Yeah, because you just get that background noise that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, because I mean, I swear, like I said, when I listen to a lot of these other guitar packs, it just sounds like it's line in right into the guitar, right into the into the preamp or whatever interface that they're using. And I'm not sure if they're going directly out from the amp into the interface, but there's just no it's a little bit too dry for my taste. And I understand, like, for certain things you're gonna want stuff that's dry, and I'm pretty sure in the very near future, when we start rolling out like one hits and certain types of loops, we're gonna have stuff that's dry. But the majority of the Soul Surplus compositions or loops that we put out with you featured on them, it's always going to just have that feel,
Yeah, I mean, the importance of having good solid state outboard gear or good tube outboard gear and guitar amps is that they add harmonics to the signal.
Yep.
And those are sort of the intangible things that you can't really get by going line into an interface.
Right.
While the preamps on the interface probably are not bad, something like a guitar, it just needs those harmonics to give it the color that it needs.
Right. So you can't be going straight from the Fender right into Scarlett 2 and think that you're going to get the same sound as you do on a Roadie sample pack.
Right. You got to mic it up, and that in itself is an art. But
right,
the more you do it, the more you'll get better at it.
Right. And then you gotta even consider how much CPU usage that you're going to incur if you're just going, right into the interface, because then you're adding too much on the back end to color it up.
Right.
When it could have just been colored going right into it,
Right. And honestly, to me, the color on guitar amp models, not that good.
Right.
Not that good.
Yeah. So I guess we can segue right into, you gave the musician side, and not that I'm not a musician, but I'm coming more from the straight up producer side of just like trying to take as many sounds from as many different elements as possible to create the mixture to get the pack just right. So, one of the things that I've already done, and I have like these, like, I don't even think it's weird. I don't want to call it weird because it's going to make me sound like I'm creepy, but I even go into some of the individual tracks and the stems that you or Joel will put out, especially if you guys are like, especially when Joel is using the Rhodes and anything that you put out. I literally will go into the stems and won't take any of the sound, but will take all of the sound that comes in right before like a specific section that you'll play. And all of that background noise, I'll just save it. Like, I'll cut it and export it into a folder, and it's just called just noise. And I don't even name it. It's just, I'm not like, okay, this is the Rhodes noise. You know what I'm saying? It's just a packet of noise.
Really?
So that's one of my techniques that I do. I put that well behind the mix, and I actually widen it. So a lot of times with you guys doing line-in with, real instruments, it's coming in mono. And so what I'll do is I'll take it and I'll throw it in stereo, and I'll add like a little bit of reverb behind it. So it's already wide from, just throwing it out to stereo, but then like the reverb just kind of brings it into the middle of the mix as well. So that's a technique that I use. You and I were talking the other day about how I like to actually just take my phone, and like if I'm downtown, I'll just pull my phone out and just hit record, and while I'm walking, I'm just recording just like street noise. Yeah. And then I'll take it back into production later, and I will literally sync it to the BPM and then add delay. And so basically there'll be things that are going on in the background that will sound like they're on the beat, but it's really because the delay is on beat. And so it's like these little techniques that I've picked up, and that's actually one of the things that I want to actually do a Soul Surplus like random noise pack, with all like just getting stuff like that, standing on the train platform. I've gotten stuff from there. I've gotten stuff from parking garages. I've gotten stuff on the airplane. Where else? I got all these random things, all these random techniques that I use just to kind of fill a track in. And so if you're anything like me, going back to the episode that I think it was last episode where I was talking about how a rapper told me that my drums were kind of like not that good.
Right.
And so one of the techniques that I used to kind of get them to a place before I got them to like where they are today was to use like different types of noise elements to add some filler to the drums. So even if they were super dry Logic drums, if you add some background noise to it, then people are like, hey man, what's that break? And it's just like, hey bro, that's not a break. You know?
Right.
But it's those little like techniques that you can get, that you can just kind of like, I don't want to say it's cutting a corner. I think it's being creative.
Right.
And so, so those are some of the things that I know that I personally do. And then now it's just like, it's really more like, I just find the right kind of breaks, and anymore nowadays the breaks just have all kinds of noise that's already built into it. And then, you know, Joel and I have like a very specific way about like how we like the lo-fi drums, and when we lo-fi the drums, it just makes the noise that much more relevant to the track, because there's I'm trying to think. So with like lo-fi, like if you're doing a lo-fi break, you're cutting out a lot of the top frequencies.
Yeah.
And so there's this most of the frequencies kind of just reside in the mid frequencies, and so there's a different feel to it where the drums are just a tad more punchy. The snare has a little bit more of a low end, as opposed to when you're just getting a regular break and then there's just a whole bunch of high frequency hiss in it, you know. And that's like, sometimes I think it's a bit too much. I think it could be harsh, so right. I tend to cut them down regardless anyway. But yeah, man, you know, as far as on my side, as just like a regular producer, you know, just being able to add those little small elements to your track, you know, you'd be surprised at like, so say like if you know, I know you hate super quantized drums. So say like if you have to do quantized drums for whatever reason, just even add in a little bit of background noise where there's just there's variation in the background noise.
Right.
I think it's just enough to fool the listener's ear into not really hearing it as quantized.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
Because I even think about some of the late 90s and obviously the mid 90s hip hop that had tons of noise in it. Because it was just a lot of breaks.
Right.
But then you listen to like a lot of the late 90s, early 2000s, and the production started to get just a tad more clean. And there was more, the noise was more what I felt like was from reverb and EQ from a mix standpoint. So, yeah, man. So I know I'm not, you know, I know my little tricks aren't as, you know, as intricate as yours, you know, but, you know, or as detailed as yours, but, there's just so much like you can do from just like regular noises. And like an iPhone microphone is super sensitive and sounds really great. I mean, I know guys that record drums now and make drum packs recording the drums on their iPhone.
Really?
And you can't tell, you cannot tell, obviously, because there's going to be post-production anyway.
Yeah.
But you know, like if you can't, you know, put the technology that you have in your pocket to work. I mean, it's
exactly
one of the greatest assets that we have as producers. And so I'm trying to think what else that I might add. Obviously reverb is like really, really huge for me. And then also too, another thing, super, super great technique that I feel like I'm trying to figure out I don't remember who I learned this from, but when I do drums, I actually set my drums in a mix as if I'm sitting at a set. So that gives it like, even if it's quantized, because like the hi-hat is set like real far left, because if you're right-handed, when you're sitting at a set, the hi-hat is like well to your left. And then the snare is panned just a little bit to the left, because when you're sitting at a set, you know, the snare is not right in front of you, it's to your left a little bit.
Right.
And then the same thing with toms and then, you know, cymbals and everything like that. But if you actually position your drums in that way, I feel like it adds more to the mix and gives it more of this element of space, even in drums, that it just allows it to sound a little bit better. So pretty much anytime you're hearing my stuff, the drums tend to be just a tad more on the left, and then the melody's always on the right, you know, that type of thing. So even that little technique can add something to your production just to make it just a bit more wide. And I'm not saying pan your your drums negative 63 to the left. You know what I'm saying? Have it all out of phase and everything, you know. But you know, if you paying it -5, -10, you know, it's good money.
Yeah. I think you know, two things. To go back to having a room mic, I love having my guitar. Let's say I record with a room mic and I have a direct mic on the amp. I love to have the guitar maybe 20 to 30 to the left, right? Okay. Then I'll take the room mic and pan that hard right.
Right.
So that you're not getting you're getting a stereo effect, but it's not an even stereo effect. Mm-hmm. But when the volumes are matched right, you're more getting an image of what the guitar is.
Right.
So you're hearing it directly on the amp, and then you're hearing what it sounds like in the room, which is really what, when you're listening to anything with your own ears, you're hearing it in the room that it's in.
Yep. Absolutely.
To me, I picked that up from listening to records in the 70s, like Rumors by Fleetwood Mac.
Okay.
There's a lot of great, room miking techniques and stuff in there. I also wanted to add, to go back when you were talking about lo-fi elements in the 90s. I just remembered, I don't know if this was in the documentary or not, but A Tribe Called Quest, Q-Tip produced their first album. Is that People's Instinctive Travels? I can't remember.
It's a good question.
Yeah,
I'm not really sure.
He did that all on pause tapes. Which
Got
is
you.
Crazy
to
think about.
Bro, did you ever see, you guys, if you guys are, everybody that's listening to this, go and Google Q-Tip doing a break live on vinyl, like with the needle.
Ooh.
That joint is crazy. Have you ever seen that, Smythe?
No, I'm gonna watch that as soon as we're done.
Oh my goodness. So what he does is, like, he's in the studio, and he literally has his finger right under the needle arm, and the break comes in, and he's literally, as the loop finishes, he's manually moving it back, and it is seamless.
Oh man,
like, how the heck does he do that? And the people that are in the studio are dumbfounded, because that's not a regular thing. Right. You know, I can't imagine what it feels like to be that great, and just like, it doesn't matter because of, like, the times that we live in, and people don't care about stuff like that anymore.
Yeah,
I can only imagine how that feels.
I mean, we're getting a little off, but it just reminds me, like, I grew up with a DJ in the house, and really just the people of that time, like that older, maybe 90s, late 90s, when they were coming up, they had their thing was making music. It wasn't necessarily about, I need to have a whatever machine, and I need to have this tape machine and sampler. It was more so whatever it takes, Yep. And that's something that I definitely picked up from my brothers coming up. One was a DJ, the other one was a musician. And that's something that I picked up from them, was that it's all about making music. It's not always about the tools,
Yep.
And so
hey, listen, when my first placements were things I made on GarageBand.
Really?
And to this day, when I tell people about that, like, I remember completely, DJ Official, God rest his soul, he 100% did not believe that I was making beats on GarageBand. So the first time I went over his house, I had to prove to him that that's what I was doing.
That's funny.
But yeah, it's really not about like the certain things that, we all can spend a whole bunch of money to try to get these certain, because you can spend a lot of money and still not achieve it,
Right.
But obviously spending money on certain tools or sounds or plugins might help you to achieve the sound a little bit easier when you don't have it. But it's really about ingenuity.
Exactly.
But if there's anything that I would definitely recommend, as far as, like, understanding, because frequencies is, like, understanding and controlling frequencies is really, like, a huge part of really getting the best out of like your production and the mix. There's actually a Skillshare class by Young Guru.
Wow.
And I think there is one particular class where he literally talks about how to control your frequencies. And I think it's like controlling your frequencies in like your home studio. Cause I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, I think that class specifically was talking to like bedroom producers, which is the majority of us, you know. And right. So, you know, if you're in a room, if you're not in a studio, then the room is not necessarily treated. And so, you know, he's teaching like basically how to control those frequencies so that your stuff is not like all over the place sonically. And I would definitely recommend you guys listening to go and check that out. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they have a few of the Young Guru Skillshare classes for free on YouTube. But listen, Skillshare is like $15 a month. You know, I spend $15 on lunch easily. You know?
Right. A day.
Yeah, literally. Well, not really, because I'm cheap. I have peanut butter and jelly and a couple noodles and stuff like that. You know, we're building a business, man. I don't have money to be spending on food all the time.
$3 is in the budget for surplus lunch.
Exactly. So but you know, for $15, man, it's, you know, that's why these types of platforms are great. So I would definitely implore you to go check that out. If not, sign up for Skillshare. At least, you know, go check those 2 classes. I think it's like 2 or 3 classes on YouTube that gives you kind of like a roundabout of what the classes are going to be. But yeah, man,
that's pretty.
This has been a really great topic, man. I definitely at some point want to be able to get to a place where, you know, maybe we can even have like a live session and talk about some of these things live. So if you guys have any questions that you maybe want to ask us that we could put into live format, where Smythe and I could get in front of the camera and maybe answer your questions live, I think this is a great jumping off point. And what do you think, Smythe? You think that's something that we can handle?
Yeah, that's pretty dope. I like that idea.
Okay. So you know, after you get done listening to this episode, which we're coming to a close with, you know, head over to, you know, our Twitter or our Facebook or our Instagram and Twitter is probably going to be the best place to hit us at. And you know, and we have 2 more things that we're going to make sure that we cover before we get done. But I'm just saying, before we even get to those points, if there's some things that you have that you want to add, or you want us to talk about possibly on that, hit us up on Instagram, hit us up on Twitter. And yeah, man, we're looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. But Smythe has a couple more things he wants to add before we hop off.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to talk about WoW and Flutter.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Which is, I think, a very underrated effect that you can use in your productions. I think that, so for you guys that don't know what WoW and Flutter is, so WoW is an effect that you'll probably see on your vinyl simulator plugins or your tape simulator plugins or even effects pedals. And all it is, it modulates the pitch up and down, almost the same way if you're listening to something off of a tape machine or something off of an old record.
Right.
The pitch is not steady. It's sort of going up and down. And Flutter is just volume fluctuation.
Yep.
So when you're listening to an old record, the volume is not really a consistent level. Of course, you know, songs have different levels and whatever, but the volume can sort of get louder and quieter in some spots. So this is an effect. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, and there is a technique to doing that. Don't just get the plug in and just crank it.
Yeah,
so that you know there's a specific type of movement that comes from it that sounds natural.
Right.
And making it sound like, you know, like sometimes people throw that effect on their stuff and it's just like, fam, I feel like I'm about to get seasick from listening to how much Flutter and WoW that you're putting on this track. It's too much, bro. Calm down.
Yeah.
Especially when you know this is not a real instrument.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't mean to get I didn't mean for the hatred to ooze out of out of my eyeballs just now. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good because I definitely feel that. I think one of the first places I heard this, I didn't realize what I was hearing. It was off of a synthesizer, and you know what? I think it was the Opus. Maybe that wasn't the first place. That was the first place that I realized that I liked it as much as I did.
Gotcha.
And yeah, so it's in the synth world, it's called portamento.
Right.
But it's essentially the same thing. It's the modulation of the pitch. And so I realized, hey, this sort of sounds like an old record. And it's something that maybe you can put on your master bus, but it's also good on certain elements.
Right.
Like I know, I guess I'll talk about this technique I use with the Nova repeater that I mentioned earlier, that delay pedal. There's a setting on it. It's called tape delay. And so it emulates what a tape delay sounds like. But years ago, I would set the delay for the signal to be completely wet. And then I would set the delay time to be right on top of my signal.
Makes
so
sense.
that pretty much I was playing in real time. But then you can control the vibrato, which is another word for that modulation of pitch, that wow effect. And so that was actually another technique that I would use, which is more specific to certain pedals, certain delay pedals, but I've gotten some placements using that technique as well. So you just get a really lo-fi, it's almost like you plugged your guitar straight into a tape machine. Or if you're playing it through a VHS tape, you put in a VHS tape. If we have listeners that are under the age of 20, VHS is not a relevant thing to you.
Right.
But yeah, you get that sort of warped sound, which I really love, and I've used in all of the packs that I've done.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great episode, man. I'm glad that we took a couple minutes to talk about this, and obviously there's a few things that we could cannonball into and do like a whole nother hour just on one or two particular techniques, but we just wanted to make sure that we hit you guys this week, and hope that you walk away inspired, and hope that you walk away trying to implement some of these tips and techniques into your next production. We will let you guys go. Make sure that you check us out at soulsurplus.com. Check out all our latest blog posts and also our latest podcast episodes. We are live on SoundCloud as well as iTunes. And this week, I'm actually pushing our stuff to go through on the Google Play Store as well as Stitcher. So once again, we thank you guys for checking in. We'll see you next week. Peace.
See you guys.